Markdown is a really powerful tool for writing data-driven documents, but one of the really most complicated parts of using it is understanding when to use code, when you're using text, and how to sort of differentiate the two and get them to play nicely together. So the Markdown document can use our code, which I'll just sort of refer to as code from now on, as well as text. But we don't want text to try and process as code, and we don't want code to process as text. Markdown, this is a bigger problem. With our script, it's less of a problem because we're not expecting to be using very much text there. And so when we create a new Markdown document, it gives us this sample body of a Markdown, which shows us some of these things. So anytime you see a gray box, that is code, and that's going to process as code. And anytime you see white background, that is processing as text. And so if we knit this default document, just as it's written, I'll save this to my desktop as delete. Processing. We can see that the data embeds itself. So I ask in the Markdown document for it to create a summary of this dataset cars. You see that code appear, and then it embeds the summary table directly into the document. I don't have to copy and paste anything to get that to process into my document. This is the real benefit of Markdown. Why did Markdown know to process that as a part of code? Because it's in this code chunk here. Anything that is written in this code chunk is going to be processing as code. Anything outside of the code chunk is going to process as text. And so that's why you can write code as text, but it won't process as text. So let me clear out all of this and we'll work through some examples. I can write here summary cars, which is the command that I want to use for the data. And when I try to knit this, it won't process. It'll just print out summary cars like I wrote it. If I want that to process and embed, what I need to do is create a code chunk, and the easiest way to do that is to click on Insert up here at the top, and then click R. And it creates this little box. What's creating this box is this series of tilde marks and the letter R here, and these tilde marks. If I remove that, everything becomes a code chunk. Wherever I set those, the second set of tilde marks closes the box. And so if I write summary cars now in this space, and I process that, I'll get my table, right? We can see this processing as text above, this first summary cars, and we can see how the second summary cars processes below, embedding the output directly. And so we can write anything we want in the text. Take a look at my plot. Mary has a little lamb. We can write anything we want in the text. And it's only when we actually create a code chunk and write code in it that we'll get the output of a code. Right? Now, if I tried in my code chunk to insert text, it won't be able to process because the code chunk can only process code. So if I copy Mary has a little lamb here, right? Mary has a little lamb is not our code. As if that shouldn't be obvious, right? It's telling me though that Mary is not a command. Mary has a little lamb is not a command that R can process. And so it's telling me that my code chunk is failing. And so we don't want to put text, descriptions, the questions I'm asking, anything that isn't our code in the code chunk. We want to put all of our code in the code chunk. So there's a few different variations of what we can do with a code chunk. So one thing that we do is we need to load our packages if we're reading in any packages. So maybe for this test or this lab, I'm asking you to use something from the package AER. And maybe I'm asking you to use the package Pander. And so when we read that in, what we'll get is a set of output that isn't embedding anything from the code. It's sending me all these messages about what I've done. And so I can get rid of those by adding here as an option, message equals false. Then let me add another code chunk. To show how this differs. So now, because I added that little bit of an option of message equals false, instead we don't get that long message. And so this is one reason that we typically want to load all of our packages at the beginning, because we can clear out some of the sort of distraction with that. Another option we can set is echo. So right now, all of the code is printing into the document. But if I was giving this to my boss, or if I was sending this to a colleague, or if I was sending it out as a paper to a journal, I wouldn't want all the code to show, all of the messy code I write throughout. So one option to get rid of that is echo equals false. Echo equals true is sort of the default. If I write echo equals false though, none of the code will actually show when I print out the final document. Right, now data California schools doesn't appear. I can still use that. I can still use the data. The data is still loaded, but it doesn't show, and so I don't have to worry about people reading all of the code I wrote. All I need to worry about is the things that I want to output later. And so these are a few different ways to use code and use text together in Markdown. Again, all of the code needs to go in a code chunk, and all of the text needs to be outside of the code chunk. You can use as many code chunks as you want, right? If I have multiple questions on a lab, I could write question 1, right? The answer to question 1 is, right, based on the data that I showed. I could write question 2. I could insert another code chunk and address whatever I wanted to do and I was asking for in question 2. Then I could write that the answer to question 2 is, right? We can use as many code chunks as we want. We can use as much text as we want, but we need to keep the text and the code separate, and we need to make sure that it's sort of within the flow of the document so that we don't put all of the code in one spot and then answer 5 questions later. We can break it up to make it more appealing and more attractive. And so that's something that we'll continue to hone as the semester goes as we're getting the final projects together, how to make a good-looking final data-driven document. Right now, though, we're really concentrating on getting the code to print. And once we have that, we can sort of move forward to some of these more specific touches of how to activate some of the options and to create an attractive final document. So hopefully that helps everyone.